Are you ready to break free from a conventional life and achieve financial independence through your version of tiny living, but you're feeling stuck trying to figure out the money part? Does the pressure to conform to societal norms make it even more difficult to embrace an unconventional lifestyle? Well, you're in the right place. I'm Laura Lynch, host of the Less House, More Moolah podcast, where every Thursday I'll bring you captivating interviews with individuals who have successfully made the transition to tiny living. They defied expectations and are thriving in their unique lives. We'll also dive deep into industry resources to address common financial concerns on your tiny journey. Together, we'll explore the emotional and practical aspects of pursuing an alternative lifestyle. I will describe a clear framework for project planning and cash flow management. Our goal is to intentionally build financial security and make a positive impact through our alternative American dream. So gear up for an exciting and empowering journey to create a life that truly resonates with you. Let's dive into today's episode and take the first steps towards financial independence and purpose through tiny living. All right. So welcome today to the Less House, More Moolah podcast. Rebecca with Tiny Topanga. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm super excited to have my first tiny home builder on the show. This is really exciting to hear about what you all are doing as a family business, who you're serving, who you're building for, and all of that. But before we get into that business part, I would love for you to share with our listeners who you are, where you came from, and kind of what was your home like for you growing up.
Sure. Thank you so much, Laura. I'm excited for you and this new project and happy to be one on the first season of interviewees. So yeah, as Laura mentioned, we run Tiny Topanga. We are a semi-new builder on the scene. And have so far started with more personalized kind of luxury tiny home projects. My home life growing up, I think, was pretty standard, I guess, in the United States, in Southern California. My younger years, I know my parents had us pretty young in their early 20s. And so I think like early growing up was we were in apartments and smaller living spaces and things like that. And then as my parents kind of, moved forward in their careers, they were able to upgrade all our things and stuff and space and all of that. But yeah, I would say like pretty standard, nothing to complain about, nothing to, go nuts about. But yeah, pretty standard Southern California.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so interesting that we come to this tiny thing from a pretty standard, upbringing. Small living has not been something that's been off everybody's radar for very long. So share with me, when did you first start talking about a tiny home?
Well, I think so, as I mentioned, like, my parents, by the time I graduated high school, we were in a bigger house and I and my brothers all had cars and we all had all the modern luxuries of life that we could ask for and need. We were able to go to college and all that stuff. And when I studied abroad and I traveled a bit after college. And I think it was really in my travels that I did a little stint on the Appalachian Trail, living out of a backpack. There were a lot of things that I did throughout my younger years in my 20s that really made me realize how little you really need to live on. And I would come back after living out of a suitcase or out of a backpack and kind of be a little bit like overwhelmed with all the stuff that I had. And so it's not like I made a conscious decision to be a minimalist or anything like that. It's just that now where I'm at in my life, I look back on that and I'm like, oh, I can see these points in life that started to lead me where I am now. And the housing part of it, when Israel and I were recently married, we were living with family, helping my grandmother, and we were looking at rent in Los Angeles and wanting to move out, but it just was kind of crazy. Like even if we could afford it, it would be a huge chunk of our income going to rent. And Israel, having grown up in Mexico, where the majority of people, maybe not the majority, but at least the people that I know in Mexico either pay very little for rent or they own what they have, or they live in family, some like version of land that has a lot of different family homes on it. So the idea for him paying an astronomical amount in rent every month was just insane. And he's like, I'm not doing it. I'll live with your grandma forever. And I'm like, no. So, we obviously love my grandma very much, but we were a newlywed couple and I was like ready to get out. And so one day I don't know, probably on social media or something, I stumbled upon tiny houses and I brought back that idea. This was years ago, probably like, I don't know, 2015, 2016. And I brought home, I was at work, scrolling the internet instead of doing my job, and brought that home to him. And I was like, what if we do this? What if we buy a tiny house? I wasn't even thinking building, but I was like, what if we buy a tiny house? We can put money toward it and put it somewhere, and then we don't have to pay rent, and then it's ours. And he looked at it with like, stars in his eyes and was like, yes, I can build you one. And we can make a business out of this. So we joke that like the first tiny house was built for us because it was with our design preferences and everything in it. But really, we always knew that we were going to be selling it. That was going to be hopefully the first of many.
That's so awesome that you've been able to, turn a thing that was supposed to be for you into a business, which really highlights the growth of the demand and the need for these living spaces. So how many tiny homes and van conversions have you all done to date?
We have done, I believe, 3 or 4 van conversions, and we are on our 8th or 9th build right now. Well, I guess we just signed another one. So between 8 and 10 builds.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So does Israel do this full time, or is this the side?
Yeah, we both are like insane entrepreneurs. So we both do this full time, and we each have our own independent businesses, independent of Tiny Topanga. So we're both like, this is full time, and then we have other side hustles, which are also other full time businesses.
Yes, and a family.
And a family, yep.
Yeah. Awesome. So how do you advise your customers when they are deciding between a tiny house and a van conversion?
So I saw that question that you sent, and I thought that was a very interesting question because most of the time they're very different markets. We don't have, it's not like we have to convince people one way or the other. The only time that we get that question is when we've done events, like we've gone to tiny house shows, and a lot of the people that go to tiny house shows know very little about it. We'll talk to a few people that go to those shows that have like their notebook full of years of research. But most people that attend those shows are just like, what's a tiny house? What's a van? They're like, this is cool. So the people that we talk to about that, what we generally say is a van is meant to be on the road. It's meant to be moving. It's meant for traveling. A tiny house is movable, but it's not really meant to be on the road. Like it's a home that you want to be in if you're going to be on a plot of land for 6 months or a year or a couple of years and then be able to move it. It's not really, there are people that do it. There's all these like YouTubers that travel around with their tiny houses, but those tiny houses are usually 18 to 20 feet. They're very light. They're not something that the majority of people want to build a life in. So that's sort of where we distinguish, a van is for travel and a tiny house is for living. I want to just like a caveat though, because the way that I'm saying this, I think is not exactly what I mean to say, if that makes sense. When I say like a van is to travel, you can also live in your van. A lot of like one of our, advisors lives out of a van, and she does it very well. So I don't mean like you can't live out of a van. I just mean you can more easily travel from place to place in a van and make a life out of it.
Yeah, I think it might be too about how many people are in the space. I had a conversation with a gal recently who's considering van, who's working remotely, and she knows where she's going to park it in her family, with her family's driveway. Right. But I think the van thing just feels more maybe manageable in some respects. But to your point, the tiny house that we built back in 2016, 2017 is definitely hardly movable from the standpoint that it was such a harrowing experience towing it across the country, and we swore we'd never move it again. But then we did a few years later consider moving it again. So yeah, that's the interesting thing. Well, thanks for sharing that. I do think that, listeners will be at all stages of kind of their exploration. So it's good to, talk about how people make those decisions too. So tell me about your favorite client build story and how you felt like you impacted their lives.
We are, like I said, we're fairly new. We built 2 tiny houses, or started 3 tiny houses last year, and we are in process on 6 tiny houses this year. So I can't say that we have like a lot of complete stories to tell. But all of our clients have unique stories and what they're trying to do and accomplish. And even just putting the tiny house together, from all the different details that they want to go in the tiny house, we get a lot of joy out of. I think perhaps the most kind of sentimental project that we're working on right now is for a young mom with young kids whose home burnt down in one of the recent wildfires in Southern California. And so that is a project that we feel very, blessed to be able to help her with that. But yeah, I mean, you'll have to get back to me in a year or so when she's been living in the house and we can say, yeah, like all her dreams came true. But right now, everything is kind of in process still.
Awesome. Yes, definitely. I want to hear from you guys again a few years down the road. So, I see from your website that you're able to help your customers source financing, and you have some good details about it on your website. But will you talk about the financing and, what you have, obviously, a lot more about it than most people. So talk about financing and how it works and how it compares to a regular mortgage.
Financing for a tiny house, if I can say this, sucks. It's just not, it's very, very hard to get good financing for a tiny house, which is part of the issue that I have a lot of phone calls with people who are young and like going through the same process that Israel and I did when we were recently married. Like, I don't want to pay rent. I don't want to live with my family forever. What if I can own something? And then they do the numbers and they're like, I'm already paying this much in rent. Why don't I finance a tiny house and pay that much or even less on a tiny house? And then they start to go through the process and then we never hear from them again because it's really hard to get a loan for a tiny house. What's the bank going to do with a tiny house? It's not a house, so they wouldn't be able to sell it easily at an auction or something like that if you default on a loan. And it's not a car, so same, they can't go and they could, in theory, I guess, go take it away, but what are they going to do with it? So tiny houses are a really, really huge risk for lenders. So if you think about it that way, it makes sense that they would be higher interest loans. You might have to do a friends and family round to get a down payment and then finance the rest. We do have options on our website. It's through a third party platform that they have. It's like 30 different lenders or something, and you can apply on our website and get pre-approved without it affecting your credit. But I'm just being totally frank here because I know that this podcast is about helping people think about these things financially. And so we have that as an option, but we don't see a lot of people get approved because they're asking for huge personal loans at like 9% interest or something insane. So what usually happens, the people that end up, and I guess there might be builders that have better in-house financing. We're just starting to look into that, but that's also a huge risk for us, so we're slow to get started on that. Yeah. But what usually happens is people are able to come up with a down payment, and then we work with them on the remaining payments to kind of stretch them out through the build, or maybe they'll finance a portion of it. We've had people get help from family. And then in some situations, we will offer in-house financing, but they have to be able to come up with at least 50%, which is hard sometimes, because 50% of a tiny house is, $50,000 to $60,000.
Yeah, I know a lot of other, podcasters are talking about this particular financing piece, and definitely an area for more service providers to show up and provide this. And, as tiny houses become more mainstream and, become viewed as, like, right now, I feel like even tiny houses are considered depreciating assets, meaning that, they're losing their value over time, like a car, rather than appreciating like a home. So, lots of shift, I'm sure, that will, occur over time. And the more and more people go this route. So, I mean, my gosh, you can get an RV loan, right?
Yeah. And that's the other thing. You actually can get an RV loan for a tiny house as well, if it's certified as an RV, which ours are. But even that sometimes is a little bit tricky, and you have to kind of, like, some of our clients have told us, if you go that route, if we apply for an RV loan, we kind of have to stretch the truth. Like, we're not going to be really living in our tiny house. And, they also, RV loans, they want you to buy a house that's already built. They don't want to give you money for a construction project. That's a different kind of loan. That's what we offer on our website, is a construction loan. But yeah, it's not impossible. It's just tricky. It's just really tricky. So I would, because people that listen to this are going to be on all different journeys of where they are looking into this, the tiny house stuff. I would just recommend starting to save yourself interest. And, if it's going to be a long project where you're saving things on Pinterest and Instagram now, you might as well start saving for the investment, so you don't have to worry about the financing piece of it.
Yeah. Awesome. Great advice. Thanks for sharing that. So one of the values that, everyone talks about when it comes to tiny living is minimalism, which you already mentioned a few minutes ago. But tell me about how you think about that, and, whether that resonates with you, and what other values associated with, a tiny lifestyle sort of, match with your values.
I think minimalism is part of it, but it's not necessarily... Like, there's all these slogans from all these, like I already mentioned, a bunch of, YouTube influencers. It's like tiny house, big life, and things like that. Like, it is minimalism in the sense of kind of downsizing your stuff. But I really think of it as upgrading your life, and, like, limiting the amount of stuff and creating more space for the things that you really love to do. And that's one of the fun things about building kind of custom projects that we like to do. Like, I'm sure if you've seen on Tiny House Nation, there will be one or two really important things to the client. And that's really fun for us to be able to figure out how to build a big kitchen in a small house for a chef, or, give a craft station for somebody who does crafting, and that's an important part of their life. And so it's not like, I wouldn't say it's about eliminating everything, or like being a monk, or, getting rid of all the luxuries in life. I think it's really about learning who you are and who your family is, and the things that you want to get out of life, and putting that in a small little, small box. But I do think minimalism is part of it. I also think having a smaller space forces you to really think about what's valuable, which is really helpful. We just went from a pretty small house to a little bit bigger apartment. And even with that small, change of space, we're already realizing, like, how we're, filling into every single corner. So I like to limit the space that I have, which helps limit this stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of like in life. If you have any extra time, life is just going to fill in. And likewise with space, the more space you have, the more stuff that will just sort of show up in there and
yeah, totally. But I also think it's an important thing to note that some people just wouldn't they wouldn't like this lifestyle. It's not like, it might seem fun seeing all this stuff on Instagram and watching the shows and stuff like that. Like, oh, it's so cute and quaint. But a lot of people, like when I talk to my friends and family, and even the way, like I still, like I mentioned, kind of backpacking on the Appalachian Trail, I still travel with a backpack. Like that's who I am. I like to keep things simple. Some people, they travel with multiple suitcases and that's who they are. And they like to have all their things, and that is fine. But I think it's important, like before really going down this journey, for people to know what they need and know what they're going to be comfortable with, and not force yourself into this lifestyle if it's not right for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like 100%. This tiny lifestyle is not for everybody, for sure. And yet at the same time, it's a lever we can pull, right? It's a one area of our life that, for, people, whether it's circumstance or values or whatever, it is a lever you can pull to choose something else. So if you're not, there are people out there that are able to, have a 30-year mortgage and, feel completely financially free in doing so. I'm not one of them personally. So I really like the lever that I can pull to turn off the mortgage in order to focus on other things that I want to achieve in my life. But it is definitely not a good fit for everybody. And so that is a really great point. So let's go back to 2016, and it sounds like that your, idea around the tiny house then, sparked some creativity and idea, and Israel kind of like jumped on that. But you all went all in, right? You're like, let's start a business with this crazy thing. So much bravery there, right? So tell me why you believe in this movement and kind of what you're seeing in the communities that you're serving, why this is important, and what you're seeing in zoning and building regulations. Like, tell us from a builder perspective, like how you see this going in the future and what you've learned about just the whole
I think
thing.
For one, it sounds scary and like a big leap of faith for us to jump into this, but I will back up a little bit and say, like, Israel did have experience in construction, and he grew up, his dad ran a towing business. And so there was and Israel also studied international relations. So I didn't mention, but we build in Mexico and we export to the United States. So that's like a big piece of our puzzle that I don't think any other builder has. And so all of those things, while they sound a little bit crazy and hard, for us, it was kind of built in. And then we both, have backgrounds in building businesses and things like that. So it didn't, for us, it didn't feel like as big of a leap. And we were kids we didn't know any better. We sometimes ask each other, like, would you do it all again if you knew what you know now? And we take a beat and we're like, yeah, I would. Probably maybe a little differently, but we would do it again. But things have definitely changed in terms of regulations and things like that, some for the better and some for the worse. I think when we first started, it started kind of as a passion project. We took like 4 years to build our first tiny house. So as we were learning about all the requirements of building and being on the road and all of those things. And we also thought, like a lot of the people that call me think now, this is going to be so easy. We can just buy a plot of land and put a tiny house on it. And some places in the US, that is possible. It is almost impossible in California. And so I have to be the bearer of bad news a lot when people are like, and especially because of our name. If you don't know, Topanga is a small, cool mountain town outside of Los Angeles. And our dream was to build tiny houses in Topanga. It's impossible. It's almost impossible. I can't say impossible because when there's a will, there's a way, but it's almost impossible to put a tiny house in Topanga. There's virtually no land left. The land that is left is regulated by the coastal commissions. It's an uphill battle that money could solve. But what people that are looking to buy a tiny house are usually not, they usually don't have super heavy, deep pockets, So I know I'm kind of going all over the place, but I feel like that's sometimes how these journeys go. So, so yeah, what we've seen, many of our clients are Southern California based, LA based. What we've seen with that is that it is hard to find a spot for a tiny house. Some of the regulations have loosened up because of the housing crisis. But that doesn't always, at first, it sounds like, okay, that's great. If it's certified as an RV, you can park, like that's what's happening in LA right now. You can park an RV anywhere, which technically means you could park a tiny house anywhere if it's certified as an RV. But there's all these loopholes. Like there's all these ways that either the county or the city is, or, whatever is trying to make money off of it, or there's so much red tape. And also the rule of you can park an RV anywhere is also not a great thing. Like that's leading to a lot of safety issues, crime issues. It's not a good solution. So I don't know really how to answer the question of like, what do we see in terms of rules and regulations? I think it's challenging. My advice to people usually is to find somebody that will let you rent their backyard or their side yard, because you can put a tiny house in those spaces, or move out of California because it's just really, really tricky. So yeah, I honestly, like when we first started, I feel like it was still kind of the wild, wild west. And so people were putting tiny houses wherever they wanted. And that was kind of the beauty of it. Like, it's not a house, it's not a car, it's not an RV. So you can't really tell me what to do, So as long as people stayed under the radar, they were able to get away with it. But now that people know what a tiny house is, and there's actually a definition for it, it's under 400 square feet, there's all these things that now you could look up, whatever your county is, you could Google your county and tiny house, and they'll probably have codes about it. Whereas, 5 to 10 years ago, there was nothing. So they couldn't really tell you what to do. And now it's just a case of, is it better to ask for forgiveness or permission, depending on, what your comfort level is with that. So I feel like I'm not giving very much hope here.
No, the reality is something that people need to know, right, when they're exploring an option. So, and it seems like Southern California is just ripe for, thinking about what housing is for people and, how to accommodate, population density and all those things. Shout out to the Tiny House Industry Association, who's doing, the hard, heavy lifting of trying to work on regulations. Definitely. What have I not asked you about that you would like to share?
I think you covered. I think you covered a lot of it. I think I do feel like I didn't give a lot of hope, so I don't want to leave it like that. The tiny house journey is a very cool one. It's worth it. It's worth saving those pins on Pinterest and those posts on Instagram and thinking about it. And like, we have people reach out to us and then we don't hear from them for a year and then they're ready. I think it's worth, if it's something that if it's a dream that you have, I would continue to have the dream and continue to build on it. You might not be able to do it today, which is what we thought we could do. We thought we could do it quicker than we did. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means, finding the right people, asking the right questions, like I said, saving a little bit of money, and it is doable. It's just, I always say, like, a tiny house is not a tiny project, but it doesn't mean it's impossible.
Yeah. And there's a lot of folks out there that I see a lot of moving around creating those tiny house communities around the country too. So, finding a place that you want to live, where maybe there's a tiny house community, is another option where you don't have to overcome some of the regulatory hurdles.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a huge, and I think those are going to start popping up more and more because the ones that exist, a lot of them are already at max capacity. So I think there's a lot of people, that have like a some land or a business mindset, they're seeing that as a real possibility. So yeah, I would definitely, I'm glad you brought that up. Like just look for those tiny house communities because they also offer a lot of benefits. You're with other tiny house owners. If something goes wrong in your tiny house, a lot of the times they're managed by people that are pretty handy. And so yeah, the tiny house communities are a really great way to go if there's one near you.
Yeah, awesome. Well, good. So I always, want to come back to the financial independence element of this. And so what thoughts do you have around, because every single, tiny house expedition YouTube, episode that I watch, somebody's talking about financial security with this lifestyle. So what's your experience and thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I believe the couple that bought our first tiny house, they did take out an RV loan. And I think it was a 5-year loan. So they've already been living in the house for 2 years. They're going to be totally paid off and have a house that they own in 3 years versus what you were mentioning earlier, a 30-year mortgage. They're going to be, the only thing they do live in a tiny house community. The only thing they're going to be having to spend is a small, in comparison, a small chunk of money on rent. And then whatever they want to spend money on that fits their lifestyle. This particular couple, they're big outdoorsy people. And so this gives them the freedom to not have a ton of expenses and live the life they want to live. I do think it sounds, and this is where I always kind of harp on the fact that it can be a longer journey than you think. But that's okay, because at the outset, it might sound to somebody who's fresh out of college or starting their first job. Like I said, they think about it mathematically. I pay this much in rent. I could pay this much on a tiny house. It's not always that easy. And it sounds crazy to be spending, upwards of $100,000 at that age, but it's not impossible. And if you look to the future, which I know is hard when we're young, but the financial benefit, it's undeniable. It completely will pay itself off. Even if in a few years you decide the tiny house lifestyle is not for you, you then have an asset that you can sell. And I know we talked about, I don't know if we were recording yet, but talking about the, tiny houses are a depreciable asset now. Mm-hmm. But if you find a tiny house owner, or somebody who's looking for a tiny house, a lot of times they're looking for something right now. And we have a 6-month build time. And a lot of people don't want to wait that long. They just want to spend the money and buy the tiny house. So even if you find out that the lifestyle is not for you, you have an asset that you can sell and, or sell it to a tiny house community. There's a lot more options, especially now that this kind of world is growing. So I don't know. I think it's a worthwhile investment, even if it takes longer than you thought it was going to.
Yeah. I mean, I think tiny, as a season of your life to your point, is kind of a viable option to give you time to, figure out, where you want to be long-term or what your vision is long-term. I saw a YouTube, episode with a gal who was, just doing it for a period of time to save up for, another house. And that's, but no judgment, right? If you don't want to do tiny forever, right? And it's just a season for you, how awesome, just to jumpstart yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Good. So if you would, please share any of your handles or websites, anything that we can do to follow you or reach out.
Yeah, sure. So we're at tinytopanga.com and Instagram, same handle at Tiny Topanga. Those are the best ways to see what we're doing and building. And if you want to reach out to us directly, you can email us at hola@tinytopanga.com. So it's HOLA at tinytopanga.com. We're faster on email than we are on Instagram. So you can DM us, but we sometimes take some time to respond.
Awesome. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for being on the Less House, More Moolah podcast. I really appreciate you sharing your insights and, just your experience, because the more information that people have as they're getting started, the better. And, it's better to have realistic expectations for everything that we try to, accomplish in life. So thanks for sharing all of that. And we really wish you the best and hope that you have lots more projects coming up that will mean more people going into tiny life in your area. And how awesome is that? So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Laura. And if anybody has any other questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Well, that's it for today's episode of Less House, More Moolah. To access valuable financial tips and resources tailored to your tiny living journey, join our exclusive community at thetinyhouseadvisor.com. Here you'll find a supportive network of like-minded individuals committed to helping each other navigate the challenges and celebrate the victories of embracing a minimalist lifestyle. So don't miss out on the opportunity to be part of this empowering tribe. Be sure to tune in next Thursday for another insightful episode of Less House, More Moolah, where we'll continue to explore practical solutions and inspiring stories to help you create the life you've always dreamed of.
Please see the show notes for important disclosure regarding the Tiny House Advisor LLC and this episode.